Hey, Randy Joe here, and this is 1001 Reviews, where I plan on listening to every single album from the 1001 Albums to Listen to Before You Die book, and reviewing each one. Today we are looking at The Pretenders' self-titled debut 1980 album, The Pretenders. The Pretenders was released in 1980 under the Real label, produced by Chris Thomas and Nick Lowe, with art direction from Kevin Hughes, nationality UK and USA, with a running time of 47 minutes and 11 seconds. When it comes to reviewing this album, I find this to be one of the more awkward albums for me to review, as there isn't too much for me to say in terms of positives, but there isn't too much to say in terms of negatives. Nothing here is super outlandish or super unique or interesting, but at the same time, there isn't anything here at all that is really offensive to the ears or anything unenjoyable about this record. I will say what it does do, though, which is be an upbeat pop rock punk album, it does quite well. There is nothing in its execution of this very idea that it's aiming to be that is particularly flawed in any way. Chrissie Hynde's vocals all over this album are perhaps the most telling element of the punk influence that this record is going for, where she sings with a lot of attitude and voice inflections in certain songs to really give to the punk influences. This is especially evident in songs like Precious, the first song, The Phone Call, and The Wait. But even still, she is not even afraid to go outside of this realm of punk and go to a more pop-centric focus or even a more vulnerable focus. On songs like Light of the Moon or Stop Your Sobbing. Stop Your Sobbing especially, she sounds much more vulnerable and much more open than she does with her punk voice that she does on many of these other songs. For the most part, she is still a punk girl through and through, but her ease to switch between this vulnerable state, punk state, and pop-focused state creates a very nice dynamic in the track list and does show off her range quite a bit over this runtime. The punkness of the record is also reinforced by the very fast-paced drumming and the really gnarly guitar riffs that have become staples of the punk genre, with songs like Up the Neck or Tattooed Love Boys, which are great examples of guitar riff-centric songs. I mean, the guitar riffs on these songs are especially strong and unique. And Up the Neck has a guitar riff that does take over the last third of its track that is really strong and super catchy to the ear. And then with the fifth song, Space Invader, Chrissie Hynde decides to take a backseat, and this is a instrumental track instead. So without her, it is far more focused on just the instrumental sounds being brought to the table, and I will say that as far as this album goes, this is one of the best tracks on here, even without Chrissie on it, because it is just extremely enjoyable and upbeat in the way it approaches this style it's going for, and it is very rockish and techno-ish, but is also somewhat still punkish in its execution. And it feels as if it is a song that is just made for film. Like you can hear this song being used in like a montage-like element. This is something that I could see being used when you're working as well, playing in the background, because it is so driven forward in its approach and style. It has a lot of energy that just kind of moves you forward with its constant addition of sounds all building up. The production techniques include things like phasing effects in the last half of this track, as well as having extremely dense guitars that make up in the climax of this song. And eventually layering in the sound of a car starting up, or maybe it's a plane going over. It's kind of hard to make out, but it is all layered quite well on top of the guitar effects. And the song being called Space Invader is also reinforced by the idea that the sound effects from the video game Space Invader are also spliced very nicely into the mix. None of it feels ever very jarring, because it all has its own room to breathe within the sounds that are being presented here. Now, there is one thing about this album that I found especially engaging and unique, and definitely stood out to me, which is that even though The Pretenders' self-titled debut album came out in 1980, much of this track list sounds like something that was in the 90s, and I think that really stands as a true quality and a testament to this album, as it is very much ahead of its time in a lot of its approach. Especially when you listen to the song Stop Your Sobbing, definitely my favorite one on here, sounds like something that would have came out in the mid-90s. among the Cranberries era in a way. And many of these songs just have a very strong nostalgic for the 90s like influence to them that to me were quite interesting, because if I closed my eyes and took out the knowledge that this came out in 1980, I would assume that it was a 90s album instead, because there's so much of it sounds of the 1990s rather than the 1980s. So overall, this album is just really enjoyable to the ears. There isn't anything specifically bad to say about this one. It's just that there isn't anything extremely outlandish to me that really puts it up at like a 10, something that strong. I think the best element of it is how ahead of its time it sounds in 1980. The soft rating comes to a 7.6 out of 10, and I will not harden the rating at all. In fact, I'm just going to leave it at a 7.6. That's where it remains as both the soft and hard rating, something I don't normally do, but I don't want to knock it down at all, and I don't think it's really much of an 8 either. I think I'll just leave it at a 7.6. And as for if it's essential to listen to, I mean, on one hand, I would say not essential because it isn't super amazing, but at the same time, I can't say that I'm disappointed in having heard most of these tracks here. And I think there is definitely a lot to enjoy here overall. So people will definitely get more out of it than I will, and I think for that, it's probably worth the listen. So I will say essential, as it is also quite ahead of its time. There are some real gem tracks on this album for sure. And that pretty much does it for this video. Let's go ahead and see what the next album that we are going to listen to in the book will be. All right, 1 to 1001, generate. 870 is the number we got, 870. Let's go ahead and see what that is. Okay, 870 is Lauryn Hill's The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill. So be sure to listen to Lauryn Hill's The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill. For exactly 1 week from now, I'll be reviewing that one. And this upcoming Tuesday, we will have a review for Iggy Pop's The Idiot. So be sure to look for that one as well, as I have a lot to say there. This has been 1001 Reviews, where I listen to every single album from the 1001 albums to listen to before you die. And you, the audience, join in on the listen and also share your thoughts and opinions about these albums with me, because I'd love to hear it. This has been Randy Joe, signing off.